Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Anyway, today, on behalf of the Poetry Center, I want to welcome you here and say that all our programs are made possible by grants from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, individual contributions from people who support our programs, and also from Passaic County Community College, which gives us a lot of support in giving us space and janitorial services and equipment and all the rest of the stuff that the college provides for us. And I have to give a shout out to our president, Dr. Steve Rose, who has been really supportive of everything we try to do here, not only through the Poetry Center, but through the Theater and Poetry Project, the Passaic County Cultural and Heritage Council, and all the other, and the art galleries, and all the other programs that we do both for Paterson residents, and Passaic County residents, but really for people all across the country. And I think that's very unusual in community college to have so many programs that really reach out across the country rather than just programs that are local. So I really have to, I think we should give Steve Rose a round of applause. I'm afraid somebody's going to steal them. Don't tell anyone. Anyway, today we're doing the Allen Ginsberg Awards readings, and this is something that we've started in 1979. Before we called it the Allen Ginsberg Awards, we called it the Paterson Poetry Prize reading. And then I don't remember, I get these ideas and then I change the names. Okay, so in 1985, I changed the name to the Allen Ginsberg Awards in honor of Allen Ginsberg, who at that point had been very supportive of our program and of everything we were doing in the Poetry Center. And I felt that he was so associated with the kind of poetry that I was really in favor of: narrative poetry, honest poetry, rooted poetry, poetry that was very specific and that really tried to reach out to people so that they would understand. I'm losing my voice. So they'd understand and understand each other. And I think that's what he tried to do and was very instrumental. I thought he was really associated with Paterson, really in some ways even more than William Carlos Williams, who also, of course, was associated with Paterson. Anyway, today we're going to start with a reading by one of our first prize winners. And I will say that this contest is judged by 4 judges. The poems are judged anonymously. So if you won, you won on your own merit, on the merit of your poems, because we don't get to see who the people are. The poems are numbered by my work-study students and then divided into stacks, and then we go over them, and we spend a long time, sometimes 2 days, going over them and reading through them and separating them into stacks and arguing about poems we like and poems we don't like. And so if you won or won honorable mention, it's really quite an honor, because it's out of a lot of submissions from all over the country and sometimes from all over the world. Anyway, today I'm really happy to welcome Svea Barrett. She's an almost 30-year veteran public high school teacher. Her book, I Tell Random People About You, won the 2010 Spire Press Poetry Prize, and her chapbook, Why I Collect Moose, won the 2005 Poets Corners Press Poetry Chapbook Contest. Her work has been published in Lips Magazine, the Paterson Literary Review, the Journal of New Jersey Poets, US 1 Worksheets, Caduceus, and other journals. She lives in Fairland, New Jersey with her husband, 3 sons, 2 dogs, and a cat. Let's welcome Svea Barrett. Suddenly we're not giving you nothing.
You've given me a lot. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Yeah. This is so tall. Okay. So I should read a couple? We're supposed to read a couple of them? No. Or just the one?
No.
Okay.
The first, second, and third prize winners get to read more, okay?
Okay. So the first one is the one that won. And the one that won. And it has an extremely long title. It's very, very long title. The title is, After My Son Texts Me from College in Connecticut to tell me about the Newtown shooting, I think about the shooter's mom. Did his mother also cry when he graduated from high school? They say he drove there in his mother's car. My two older sons, when they are home, drive my car too. Did his mother used to take him to soccer games, answer endless questions, hold her hand in front of his baby face at night to be sure he was breathing? Did she worry when he didn't finish his bottle? Maybe she was a better mom than I and breastfed him and his brother. His parents were divorced as well. Did they separate when he was 12? Did he ask her why she was doing this to him? Did she make him go to soccer even when he was scared, said he didn't know anyone? Did she make him go even though he was crying, teaching him not to be a quitter? Did she tell him to care about others, to listen to his coaches and teachers, to be respectful? His mother, she was a teacher too. Did she also cry every morning when she had to drop him at daycare, driving to work at her school through a smear of tears, taking deep breaths in the car, blowing her nose and checking her makeup in the car window before crossing the parking lot to the brick school building, smiling hello to other teachers, unlocking her classroom door, inviting all the other mothers, daughters, and sons to come inside? Okay. This one is, someone asked me this morning if I write about ordinary things or do I only write in response to big events like that. So this is ordinary things. It's called It Is What It Is. Our neighbors all have landscapers, some maids, contractors always parked outside, new dining room set, the tile guy, vinyl siding. At our house, the birds are in the gutters, so we know it's spring. They're tiny, finch-sized, brown with darker apostrophes on their wings. The gutters are supposed to be maintenance-free, and I guess that works pretty well for the nesting birds. I can never bring myself to remove them until after the hatching. Of course, by then, rainwater has backed up into the bay window. But hey, we're not selling the house for a few years, and it's nice waking up to their chirpings. It's no use getting floors done now either, or new couches, the dogs would ruin them. Just what we used to say about the kids. Small white flowers whose blossoms swing their curly white heads above the lawn this early in April are maybe chicory or some other kind of weed, but they're pretty. And the rest of the lawn isn't ready to mow. Well, except maybe for the onion grass we all hate to pull because of the way the smell clings to our skin. And the dogs like the yard the way it is, just fine. They lie perpendicular to each other, noses out, bellies stretched in the dust of the bald patches they have shaped to fit themselves. Dirt piles from digging holes wait for when they wake. They sneeze and close their eyes in the spring sun. They know nothing on earth could be more perfect. This next one is called Deal Breakers. It's sort of a questionnaire for people in new relationships. which I was in a few years ago. It's called Deal Breakers. Do you frequently arrive late? Do you care? Does he? Who pays the second or third time? Who suggests the first bill split? When do you tell him you have children? 3. Does he want children of his own? Why not? Are you uncomfortable with your body? Do you dress or undress in front of him? If so, how old are you? Do you tell him? Do you tell how much you weigh? Would it be a deal breaker if he asked you? Is it always naked or partially clothed? In the dark, lights on, shades drawn, with the door locked, with no one in the house? What if you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of things? Do you hold it? If you can't, and then when you come back, he's done, is that a deal breaker? Do you fake it? What if you fart? Do you acknowledge? If he does, is that a deal breaker? Does it matter if the dogs are watching? If they jump up on the bed? If you start laughing and it's over? If neither of you care? Are you weird if you sometimes prefer dogs to people? Do you want to be weird? Do you want to be weird or not to want to? Why or why not?
Okay. Svea. Come back again. Thank you, darling. Okay, just put them all here so I have them. Yes. Okay, our next first prize winner, because we had 2, is Grace Cavalieri. Grace founded a radio series 37 years ago this month and still produces the poet and the poem for public radio. Nearly 3,000 poets have been featured on the air. It's now recorded at the Library of Congress. She's the most, she's the most recent recipient of the Associated Writing Program's George Garrett Award for Service to Literature. Grace has had 16 books and chapbooks of poetry published and has seen 26 of her full-length and one-act plays on American stages. She founded the Washington Writers Publishing House and the Bunny and the Crocodile Presses in Washington, D.C. She is monthly poetry columnist and reviewer for the Washington Independent Review of Books. Grace is a force in poetry and has been really responsible for helping so many poets over the years through her wonderful program, which goes out across the country. And it's such an act of generosity to do this for 37 years and all the other things that she does. Let me welcome my darling Grace. Oh, it's a lot of fun.
It's reason to go on. I don't care if it's the first poem you ever wrote. You just never believe you can write another one. And so thank you so much. I'm going to read the poem that was chosen, and it's called Gray's Tea Room, 1940. I don't know why they called it a tea room. They didn't serve tea. In fact, I don't know of anything they served except hot roast beef sandwiches on Saturday night with mashed potatoes, 35 cents. Sometimes my father ordered pork. We sat on high stools at a counter and no one thought to sit on chairs any more than we expected a chocolate cake more than once a week from Feastal's Grocery. Across the street from Gray was a record store. And once I asked my father for $5 to buy an album of Carmen Cavallero playing on the piano. I couldn't believe my good luck. He gave it to me just like that, as if he had another one in his pocket and maybe even more. We felt prosperous at the counter, waiting to be handed dishes piled high with gravy for people like us who could order whatever they wanted, either beef or pork. Recently in a classroom, my students argued whether it were better to have more or enough, and what those two words meant: satisfaction, wish expansion, possibilities, ambition. If philosophically we must have enough before we can have more, for more can never come from lack. For 6 years I passed grays on my way to school and never thought anyone else was there, so that anything else was ever eaten by what we had. Grays was to come alive and open once a month on Saturday. Now, when I see a tea room, I want to tell them what they're missing. What with their sag tea and biscuits. Sometimes in the late afternoon, I wish we were all alive and back on Stuyvesant Avenue. I like to think of that, when we didn't know differently, when there was always more than enough. The next poem I'm going to read is called, this is the title of my book. My husband did a sculpture. He was a world famous sculptor, and we were married for 60 years. He died last year. And this is the first date I had with him when we were 13 years of age. And we were married 7 years after this date. And it was important because in those days, like you watch TV and everyone's jumping everyone's bones on TV, and they're having sex every minute, the first date. And you won't believe it, but there was a time in the 50s when you didn't even burp in front of a boy because you didn't want them to know your body did things. And so it's called This Sounds Like Something I Would Say, and it's really about innocence. And it begins with the first date I ever had at the Strand Theater on Hermitage Avenue with Ken. I was 13. I wore a green suit with a peplum. What do peplums? What do we know of peplums now? But we watched Greer Garson in Ivy, and I didn't swallow saliva in my mouth for 2.5 hours. It was full of spit. So that's called This Sounds Like Something I Would Say. What I did, more than likely, when he stood up in that movie theater was swallow. That day, at age 13, love was given to me. Today, clouds look like they did, small bunches, white puffs behind branches. Later, he would swear he never heard me gulp, although I held saliva in my mouth for 2 hours, because the body, even just a throat, should not make noise. Today, on a day just like this, Jan and I would walk down the hill. Jan is with me in kindergarten, and everything smells like bread. We are sitting together on small chairs at the Hermitage Library. That was before we knew what Eve really did. Even then, we wondered about the stories, the room we were in. Did the light make the path to the door, or did the path make the light? There was no one to ask about bright windows, shadows, or what Eve would do, and what was already widening within us. I'll read 2 more. One is called Tomato Pies, 25 cents. It sounds like I know the price of everything. I still do. If you're raised in the Depression, I can tell you every price at Safeway and how it's different from Giant. Tomato pies, 25 cents. My grandmother opened the first Italian restaurant in Trenton. They called them tomato pies. That I think could have been the first on the East Coast, but I don't want to fight with Patterson. But I think it was one of the first in the East Coast. And so this is her restaurant, the Venice restaurant. Tomato pies, 25 cents. Tomato pies are what we called them those days, before pizza came in, at my grandmother's restaurant in Trenton, New Jersey. My grandfather is rolling meatballs in the back. He studied to be a priest in Sicily, but saved his sister Maggie from marrying a bad guy by coming to America. Uncle Joey is rolling dough and spooning sauce. Uncle Joey is always scrubbed clean, sobered up in a white starched shirt after cops delivered him home just hours before. The waitresses are helping themselves to handfuls of cash out of the drawer, playing the numbers with Moon Mullen and shad sent in from Broad Street, 1942. Tomato pies with cheese, 25 cents. With anchovies, large, 50 cents. A whole dinner is 60 cents before 6 p.m. How the soldiers bust in from Fort Dix would stand outside all the way down Warren Street waiting for this new taste treat. Young guys in uniform, lined up and laughing, learning Italian before being shipped out to fight the last great war. Thank you. I will end with what I won. You know, when you win something, you never think you really deserve it. You always think, oh my God, they sent it to the wrong Grace Cavalieri. As much as you want it. And this is about the first prize in poetry I ever won. And I was just a new wife. I had Cindy, she's here now. She was just born. And my mother had just died 2 weeks before. So, and I was writing poetry. I mean, go figure. What I won. The sack dress was the style then, with a single strand of pearls. The sack dress was designed to see the body move lightly beneath. That's why I wore it to my first poetry contest in Philly, leaving my 4-month-old at home. Of course, my husband had to drive, as nervous as I was, so we waited in the car all day while I sat in the big room, first time out since I found my mother dead and then had a baby 2 weeks later. My husband stayed all day in that car in the snow. I won first prize about winning my mother, but it was said much better than this, as you can imagine, to win first. It even began with notes upon a phantom lute, although the poet said, what do we know of lutes now? But what did he know of walking into her bedroom and finding her a pale shade of lilac? That just goes to prove, I guess, I was talking about the wrong thing in the poem. And the poet was surely onto something. I have to say I looked wonderful, gaunt with grief and colitis, 1956, hurrying across the street where my husband was waiting to take me home. The first wrong victory in my hand. Thank you so much.
And now I'll introduce our second prize winner, Charles Johnson. Charles is a graduate of Rutgers University, and he's the poetry instructor for the Middlesex and Monmouth Counties Arts High Schools and the Middlesex County Youth Shelter, and a visiting poet for the Patterson school system. A Vietnam War veteran and retired newspaper editor, he is also a Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation poet in the schools, and has been the poetry editor of the online literary magazine Identity Theory. He's 2011 New York Prize winner for his poem Leaving. His third poetry collection, Smoke Signals, was awarded the 2010 Patterson Poetry Prize for Literary Excellence and is the first place winner of the 1998 Allen Ginsberg Poetry Awards. He lives in Hillsborough, New Jersey with his wife, Lainey. Let's welcome Charles Johnson.
Thank you, Maria, and I want to thank the Poetry Center and the Allen Ginsberg Awards for this honor. I tell my poetry students that anything we see or do is worthy of a poem. This first piece I'm going to read was prompted by the first time I attended a poetry reading at the Patterson Museum. almost 20 years ago. Road Hog, an epigraph by William Carlos Williams. No idea, but in things. A poem almost crashed into me on the Garden State Parkway, a few miles from Patterson's Great Falls. Driving south in the passing lane, I was nearly rear-ended by a lyric. The lines pressed tight to my bumper like a nosy apartment dweller's ear against the wall of his next-door neighbor. Though I was doing the speed limit, lines tailgated until, frustrated, I moved right out of the way. A stanza flashed past, then slowed so it was next to me. I eased off the gas, but the poem stayed even. I sped up a little. The lines did the same. It made no sense. I downshifted to third and swerved onto the shoulder. The words cut in front, forced me down into second, then smoked their tires and disappeared in the traffic ahead. I pressed on wildly, trying to keep up, but the poem was gone. In its wake, overheated cars steamed by the side of the road. Skid marks trailed to jackknife tractor trailers. Exits were clogged with vehicles scrambling to make their escape, while the lanes heading north slowed to a crawl, with the drivers rubbernecking to see what all the upset was about. I got off the parkway at exit 129 to continue south on the New Jersey Turnpike. Still shaken by my own heedlessness, I asked the man in the toll booth if any lines had passed. He nodded and said state police were chasing a reckless poem racing south. Days later, I learned authorities had found a rhyme parked on the streets of Princeton. It was jail for driving under the influence. After being bailed out by some university undergraduates, the poem returned to Patterson, where the verse now falls free like rainwater. Thank you. This is the poem for which I received a second place award. Sunday Comics. Dad's gone. Died after 93 years of lopsided American history. Prohibition, a Great Depression, World War II, Korea, Civil Rights, Vietnam, Women's Lib, Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, Gay Lib, and finally, dementia. Snaking between all these news were his reoccurring memories as a young Negro soldier in the South in 1939. A black GI in a segregated unit, he had to step into the street whenever a white person walked toward him on a sidewalk in the Mississippi town where he was stationed before being shipped off to Europe to join the war to make the world safe for democracy. In his experience, contradictions were not linguistic puzzles. Irony was not a rhetorical device. Life was serious business that always meant red ink marred his bottom line. Then there was me, a first and only child, integrating my classes throughout school and college, a son who could walk however and wherever I chose, a son who could sit in the front of any bus holding hands with a girlfriend with long blonde hair, a son who took the Army's officer's oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And the enemies were there every day on the front pages, in news lousy with the foul odor of Western civilization decomposing like flowers left standing too long in water, filling a crystal vase. For Dad's generation, a newspaper was essential. One was delivered daily, and he read about what he knew was painfully true, but always first, the comics. Sunday newspapers were the best, with comics in large, full-color panels. Whatever ugliness was happening in the world or had occurred in his life in black and white vanished for a few seconds behind a colorful curtain of chuckles at what he ordained was the only worthwhile news in the paper. Everything else was not news. It was old. Old hatreds, old crimes, old lies, old sorrows. If there were anything new to be read, it was in the comics, especially the Sunday comics, which started off each week for Dad with a smile, which never had happened enough despite his 93 years of trying. I'm going to close with two poems. One has to be about Patterson because this is where poetry matters. A work in progress. In a line outside their classroom door, uniformed sixth graders shuffle silently, waiting for the teacher's signal to enter. Just a nod, not a word, invites them inside, where a foreign world of tests and alphabets spells out lifestyles unknown in their neighborhoods. There's hope inside these four walls, promises made by well-meaning teachers from suburbs surrounding the city. The Silk City, P-Town, Patterson, where Mills and Market Street grew from water flooding from the Passaic River to wash away despair. A local industrial revolution that eventually dried up, starving second-generation immigrants while stranding these young students on its banks. Sixth graders, hungry for any morsel of truth to swallow as a precaution and protection against stray gun shops, singing death on neighborhood street corners. Wear a school uniform and not an accent or school skin color marks a youngster as different, since education is treated like an alien on every block. And finally, fifth grade language arts. At the time, it didn't quite make sense. I had just hit a single at recess during my first week at a new school. But when I reached first base, full of pride at my accomplishment, Danny Jaworski called me a nigger. So I called him a cracker. The only word I marginally knew was meant to demean his person. And that was that. No pushing, no hitting. In fact, Danny didn't seem to be hurt at all. Matter of fact, I don't think he knew what a cracker was. I'm certain I did. I just knew I had to respond in kind, or unkind as it were, with a word my father reserved for whites whenever they chose to slight him. But Danny and I both understood what nigger meant. Its definition made clearer each day by our elementary school education. The grand experiment was working. In the wake of court-ordered integration, we were beginning to speak a common language. We were learning which words were supposed to hurt the most. Thank you.
Now I'm going to call the honorable mention people up, and I'm sorry that we don't have time for longer readings by the people who won honorable mentions, and mostly I'm not going to give some of the trolls here. Mostly I'm not going to give introductions, but for the first person I'm just going to say one thing. Our first honorable mention is Stanley H. Barkan, and Stanley comes from Merrick, Long Island. But I also want to say that we've been talking about workers in the fields of poetry, and I think Stanley has been working really hard in the fields of poetry for how many years, Stanley? 44 years. He's the editor and publisher of Cross-Cultural Communications Press, and he's produced an inordinate number of books and set up readings everywhere in the world and just done a great deal to open poetry, American poetry, to poets from other countries and to bring American poets to other countries. So I think he deserves an extra special.
It's always a special pleasure to be here with Maria, Laura Boss, and all of you wonderful people. There's always a wonderful audience here. I'm going to read the poem that has been selected for the honorable mention, which is in Raisins with Almonds, Pasali Kumerli, a book which took 13 years to come into being. It was translated by Marco Scalabrino of Trapani, Sicily, into Sicilian. And half of it is in Jewish, for my Jewish culture, and the other half is my love of Sicily. So this one is in the Sicilian section. The alleys of Cefalù. So narrow, I have to turn sideways to pass. Towels, dresses, stockings hang from balconies overhead. The sea just beyond the edge of archway. A woman and her child step out of a hidden doorway. Shadows and sun rays, passing through down steep steps, the varied stone floor, mosaics, ancient walls. A fountain offers water to wet the dryness. Flowers cover windowsills. Plants form foliage in the alcoves. No sound disturbs the passage. Only eyes are amazed at the profusion of so much in so small a space. The alleys of Cefalù. Thank you.
I said one poem, right?
Okay, our next poet is Howard Berelson. You came. I do that too. It's very hard to get used to the bastone. In Italian, that's what it's called. Okay, Howard Berelson will be up next, and I'm not going to introduce you, darling, but we will be publishing all these poems in the next issue of PLR, where Patterson Literary Review, where their bios will all appear. Sorry.
This poem comes from a workshop that Maria and Laura Boss held in Mendon, New Jersey. It's called A Weekend of Poetry. Saturday afternoon, and I am dead tired. You hear me? Dead, as in dead. I'm afraid to lie down because I won't get up. We walk like zombies, eyes glazed, staring inward, and stand around in a stupor as we obediently wait for the dinner bell. Like Pavlovian dogs hovering near the door, waiting to pack in even more calories into our bodies. We walk in single file. I am not used to this feeding. My belt is now opened another notch. We are locked into each personal confessional. My mother did, my mother didn't, neither did or nor my father. Ditto my brother, sister, significant other, my dog, my cat. Talk of homicide, fratricide, suicide, or insecticide, it's all the same to me. Except for the cute story about the frog. Frog legs perhaps served with a cold glass of Chardonnay. Oh, what I would give for a glass of wine. Except for that poetic dandelion wine. No poetry, please, not with wine. I need the booze. I want to lie in bed and watch dumb TV. I want the kind of stimulation that dull reality provides, like CNN, to see if we're at war again. Or if we are wiped out financially. Or if I have to go back to work. You know, the light stuff that makes up our lives. I don't want to fill spaces. I don't like spaces. I don't want to look at my yearbook because I'm not in it. I don't want to think about my father, my mother, my brother, my cat, my dog, my friends or mothers or exes or the insecticide. I want to feed them. Tomorrow will be Sunday if I survive intact. I will get the Sunday papers in the afternoon when I return home, and I will open up the bottle of Chardonnay that I thoughtfully placed in the refrigerator early Friday. I welcome the bliss.
Our next reader is Norma Ketzis Bernstock, next honorable mention winner. Make sure to get the next issue of PLR so you can find out more about all our honorable mention people.
school English teacher suggests we listen to FM radio. In 1961, Mr. Cohn, sophomore English, a Pied Piper of sorts of New York culture, captivated my imagination with tales of a world outside of suburban Queens. Somehow I convinced my parents to purchase a Zenith AM/FM radio, a step towards transformation. The precious radio in its wooden case sat on my bookshelf, sandwiched between paperback copies of To Kill a Mockingbird and Profiles in Courage. In college, I listened to WBAI, whose counterculture broadcasts encouraged my radical inclinations. I discovered jazz and John Coltrane on the eve of Yom Kippur. My FM radio quietly tuned in on this, the holiest night of the Jewish year, when radios, TVs, and phones were supposed to be silent in our observant home. I had changed, my mother said. Was FM radio to blame? The Zenith moved with me to my marriage home. Its wooden bulk sat on a shelf of its own in the den. Then one day the music stopped, no sound at all. My husband, who loved vacuum tube technology, dismantled the radio, its parts left scattered on a bench. The ruined radio lay in disrepair for months, maybe even years, before we noticed it again, about the time my husband often said, "You've changed." He never did rebuild the radio, and like our marriage, we both lost interest anyway.
Our next honorable mention winner is Gail Fishman Gerwin. Gail, where are you? Oh, I see a little blonde head.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations to all the winners. These poems are wonderful. And I'm happy to be back in my hometown, where people don't say, "You're from Patterson?" This poem is called My Skype Cousin. You have a cousin, Hadassah, my mother Seal said to my young self. She lives in Israel. Her mother and I share the same name, really Zilly. I recall boxes of clothing Mama packed, took to the downtown post office, sent across the sea to the family she'd never met, saved for letters on sheer blue paper. The rest of that family, my mother's sister, brother, their spouses, snatched from their homes, herded to a ghetto, carted to the camps, eliminated. One box bound for Israel held my sister's blue tulle prom gown, strapless. Was it for her date with Herbie, Bert? The gown became Hadassah's wedding dress, demure bodice, an illusion veil sewn from the underskirt. In the photo Zilly mailed, Hadassah, only 20, resembles my mother. Apple-cheeked, glimmer of mischief in her eyes. With our young daughters, we traveled to Israel, 1979, a tour with a troupe of teachers. The price was right. For months before, we tried to locate these cousins, wrote to the Red Cross, other agencies. No letters reached Israel, a postal strike, we were told. Your father always wanted to go to Israel, my mother said. I was afraid to fly. I would have met Zilly. After my father died, Mama would not go. Not alone, not with a widows group, not with us. I couldn't do that to your father, she said. Facebook. Likes, comments, searches. I find a man with the same last name as my cousin's family. His profile photo atop a horse. My family on a horse? Message him privately. No, he writes, I don't know of anyone by that name in the city you mentioned, though weeks later he messages me. Here's an address. Maybe you should write. I send a letter, no postal strike this time. Include my email address. It reaches Hadassah's brother, a cousin born long after the war, a cousin with the same September birth date as my daughter. He friends me on Facebook. Look, a photo of my little girl. Then gives me his sister's email address. Hadassah. I write, she writes. I send her poetry, she sends me artwork, tells me her mother died years before our long-ago trip. My mother would not have met her. Skype. We connect, touch our screens, the closest we might ever come to holding hands. We cry, we giggle. She tells me her story, how she and her mother slipped from the ghetto. A woman gave us her papers. Wandered through the seasons for 4 years, slept in rail stations, other shelters, hid from the demons who took her grandmother, grandfather, aunts, uncles, her baby sister Julianne. All we ate were potato skins. All we owned were the clothes on our back, she says. Someone even stole my mother's underpants in winter from the hook where they were drying. We hid in a Dresden church while bombs fell, then made our way to Israel. She and her iPad take me on a tour of her apartment high above the Mediterranean. From my chair in New Jersey, I revisit the sea, where my daughters did cartwheels in a town minutes away from where she lived, where I couldn't find her. Behind her, a Tiffany lamp she crafted. Eggs sizzle on her cooktop. Salad awaits in a glass bowl. On the screen, I introduce her to my husband, show her our dog. Technology takes us across miles and years that separate us, lets us share our aging faces, lets us learn about each other, as we never could when my mother told me, you have a cousin Hadassah. She lives in Israel. Her mother and I share the same name. Thank you.
Our next poet, I'm sorry I'm losing my voice today, forgive me. Our next poet is Jim Gwyn. Let's welcome Jim. It's just allergies. I actually don't have a cold.
Okay, sorry. Little word there. Everybody ready for the Super Bowl? Everybody tired of the Super Bowl?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, this poem sort of has its beginnings like before the Super Bowl. Okay. First Super Bowl was in 1967, Green Bay 35, Kansas City 10. Okay, 1965, there was a 4-part serialization of a book called The Man with the Golden Gun by Ian Fleming. And I was an aspiring 16-year-old, spy. And here I am, like under the covers in my bed, in my little flashlight, and I'm reading the 3rd part of the serialization. Okay, and all of a sudden the covers are like ripped off me. I got this flashlight in my face, and I'm thinking it's Scaramanga from the book itself, And then all of a sudden you hear a woman's voice. I thought it's Rosa Klebb from the KGB, right? Okay. It turns out it's my mother. She says, "What are you doing reading that Playboy?" And I said, "Well, I only read the articles." It's Ian Fleming. It's Ian Fleming. So anyway, 1982. I'm reading an article, which is a interview with Billy Joel. Okay. I won't tell you about the other article I read with Kim Malik and an aspiring actress dancer from Houston, Texas. But there was an article in there called "Real Men Don't Eat Quiche." Okay, all right. Everybody remember that one? Bruce Feirstein. It sort of inspired all these other spin-offs from it. Real dogs don't eat leftovers, and real programmers don't use Pascal and all that stuff. Real men don't bond. Okay. Years later, not that many, 1996, my boys are 6 months old. I get a phone call from my wife's uncle, right? He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm reading to the boys." He says, "Well, what are you reading?" He's thinking like Sandra Boynton or, Goodnight Moon or something. I say, I'm reading the U.S. News and World Report. And he says, what do you get out of that? I said, well, real men read, you know? And so, you know, it must have been a sign, all right? So I got this, it's a sign, okay? Couple years later, I get a T-shirt, Real Men Read. I expect to see bumper stickers, you know, that go viral, like the whole, you know, things go viral all the time, right? Of course, we didn't have the word viral then. But, so anyway, wasn't a poem yet, but all of a sudden, a couple years ago, I go off like with some friends down the block, and that's when everything, my whole 40 plus years of my habits, my life, everything came together, became the poem. You know, this, you know, seminal moment came together. Thank you, Bruce Beerstein. Real Men Read. So I'm off for a men's weekend, not an Iron John thing or off with weapons looking to kill Bambi and her mother. Just 6 of us driving south to our host's second home for his birthday celebration. What he wants, driving off for a few days without the wives. Off to do what men do when they're together. Which is what? Drink beer, fart, and scratch their hairy chests, right? Which is what women say all men do when they're alone and without their women, right? And somehow the women never expect men to be more than Boy Scouts or Howard Stern fans off on a camping trip. Somehow it's these boys and men who are the ones that don't grow up, who act gross and riff their bathroom humor, who somehow, to women, morph into all men, like a false syllogism. Like none of us can do anything without being told first, don't drink too much, don't fart, don't fall out of that tree. I remember a weekend with my friend Bill. Well, we did drink beer and played chess and talked about Camus and the divisions of the world, the left and the right. That is to say, right politically, not right as in being correct. The old and the young, the workers and the shirkers, those who swung with Sinatra and those who pumped their Elvis, which is to say, the old and the young. But even with the beer, there wasn't a fart between us, except for the cat, who started off female, but who was now neutered, so none of that sex stuff counts, and none of us beat our hairy chests, not even the cat. So, off with a new crowd, except, like I said, this was not an Iron John thing. Not off to get to know, really know each other, or get in touch with our inner man, but off to celebrate the birthday of our host. So, how do we express ourselves? 5 men who really don't know each other except through our host. Do we use clothing? The tie-dyed t-shirts to reflect our inner Grateful Dead? No, that's just way too old. Or do we wear the latest promos from the package store? Moosehead hats, or 10 cane rum shirts, or sports jerseys to let us know what teams we belong to, and then grimace when there are ancient rivalries among us. Jets, Giants, Eagles, although I'm not so keen on football. Mets, Yanks, damn Sox. After a few hours drive and arriving late at night, what have we gotten pumped about? J-Lo or Beyonce or Angelina Jolie's leg thrust? No, just some idle talk about data mining, IT security, conspiracy theories, and politics. And at 1 in the morning, after, yes, of course, beers and brandy, what wild activity do we engage in? We watch the latest bootlegged Denzel movie, play a few games of chess. Yes, ripping it up on our men's retreat. And the next morning, a Saturday, getting up early, like we were each going to work, first sending a text message home, then coffee, eggs, the New York Times. Real Men Read.